Hi, everyone. I'll give people a few minutes to join us, see who's here.
Hi, Mrs. Q.
Hi, Ellen. How are you? You know,
Good.
I was looking for a way for you to turn on closed captions,
Thank you.
and you have to do it on your end.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know how to do that. I'll look into it. But for the meantime, if Adam comes over, do you want to see Mrs. Q? He can either read your lips or.
Okay. I should, I forgot to look until just now, and I realized I should have looked earlier and sent you a little message about how to do it.
Thank you. Thank you. That's Cousin Adam.
Hi, Adam.
But thank you. We'll just oops, what did I do?
Oh, that was me. There I am. Sorry about that. That was me. Hi,
We'll
everybody
just
on
listen for a while.
for everybody on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, it's good to see you. I missed everyone last week, but for those of you who came out to see us for Evacuation Day, it was great. And thank you for joining us. We had a really good time. And those of you on the live stream, thank you for your patience. But I think everyone got the email with the nice edited tour with the live stream nicely edited and all of the original prints and things added to help you better enjoy where we were on the tour. So thank you all. Oh, lots of messages. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see everyone back. Um, from everywhere. Thank you so much. You might notice I'm wearing something new tonight. I really quickly yesterday made up this, it's called a short gown or a bed jacket, and it's just a little informal thing that pins together, or you can tie it together with an apron. And I had this lovely fabric laying around. It's gray, and I don't know if you can tell if the camera's good enough, but it has gold threads in it and some white pearlized threads, and it's a really pretty little floral print. So yesterday I just threw it together really quick. It only took me about an hour to make, and it looks really nice. And it's a nice, more relaxing thing to wear than a usual, dress and everything and wig. So I just have on my little bonnet and the short gown, which a lady would wear at home if she was at home just receiving close friends or just at home doing whatever she might be doing. So a little bit more informal tonight. So let me check out the messages before I get started. Oh, we're all over Fort Myers, Atlanta, of course, the Bronx, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Indiana. Wow, this is great. Thank you all for joining me tonight. And let's see, I want to see if anybody's trying to get on Zoom. Everything looks like it's working well, so that's good. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about factionalism and political parties. Always a great subject, right? And so the inauguration was last Saturday, and some of you joined us for those festivities. And we have all now recovered from all of the parties and balls after the inauguration, and we're all back to relaxing a little bit. And we're back to business as usual in the city of New York, which means that everyone has gone back to arguing with everyone about everything. So we had our one day, April 30th, where everyone came together and celebrated the inauguration of the president, and now we are back to normal. And so I thought tonight I would speak to you a little bit about why New Yorkers are always arguing, and a little bit of the history of that, and how that's come about over time. Oh, someone's in upstate New York. Excellent, great. And I do want to tell you that the next time I'm going to be appearing in costume will be either July 9th or July 10th. It's a weekend. I will be working for Francis Tavern Museum as Mrs. Q, doing a special July 4th themed tour, and that'll be the weekend after July 4th. And those tickets will be on sale through Francis Tavern Museum, and I'll tell you more about it as I know more about it. They just asked me a few days ago, so of course I'll be really happy to do that for them, and we'll go out and have a great time talking about Independence Day and the Declaration of Independence. So speaking of Independence Day, our division in New York began long before the Declaration of Independence. Some of you might know. New Yorkers at that time while we were under rule of the crown, divided up into a number of different camps. You might remember that we were initially a Dutch colony. So, of course, after the British took control of the colony, there were the old Dutch and the people who allied with the Dutch, like the Scots and the Scotch Irish and the French Huguenots, versus the English and the Anglican Church of England. So, that was an early division of people we had here in New York, who were politically divided and divided on social and religious issues as well. So that would be our earliest political division, which would be the people here who did not like the royal appointments, right? The governor and all of the officials that came along with that. So we always had struggles and difficulties with that. But as we got closer to what would be the War for Independence, New Yorkers kind of divided into two camps that we might call Whigs and Tories, similar to in England, who at the time had Whigs and Tories. The Whigs in America tended to be more critical of rule and the Parliament and wanted more freedoms for the colonies or more recognition of our freedoms as subjects of the crown. So I don't want to say freedom from England, but more recognition of our freedoms as British subjects. And the Tories, of course, were more supportive of the crown. And some people might say that the Tories were more aristocrats because they got their power and their land and so forth through the crown, but it's not really that cut and dried. So there are people who are Tories and supporters of the crown who are not extremely wealthy. And then there are very wealthy families like the Schuylers and the Livingstons and the Jays who will be Whigs. So it's not always a class sort of thing. They may also be called, in words you're more familiar with, patriots or Whigs, and loyalists or Tories, or here in the city of New York, Livingstonites versus Delanceyites, in honor of the two most powerful families that led those factions. So in general, the Livingstons will be the leaders of the Whigs and the Delanceys, the leaders of the Loyalists. Or Tories. Now, when I do my modern tours, people always ask me if the Delanceys were such big loyalists, why do we still have a street named for them? But we do, and that's mainly because that land was all owned by them, and it's more of a historic designation that it was Delancey Street. And of course, we have many things throughout New York State and New Jersey named for the Livingston family. So Livingston is still a name we see all around in our modern time. So leading up to the war, we have the Livingston faction and the Delancey faction arguing and struggling with each other for control of New York. And that generally is taking the form of pamphlets, cartoons, broadsides, verbal debates, and things like that. And the debate really is over how the colonies ought to be treated by England. So the Livingston faction or the Whig faction believes that the colonies deserve to have more of their rights as British subjects recognized. That we're not here simply for the fulfillment of the financial needs or endeavors of the aristocrats of England. That we're not here simply to be exploited by the aristocratic class in England. So that would be the Whig view. And by the way, that is the Whig view in the Parliament as well, that the colonies deserve more recognition and less exploitation. And of course, the Tory view is, well, the colonies exist for the benefit of the aristocracy. They're there for the benefit of England. They're not there for themselves. They're there for us. And they shouldn't complain so much, because without us, who would protect them, from those savages, from all of the French and all of the threats? Who would protect them if not for us? And everything they have is because of us, which of course is nonsense. But that would be the view of the Tories, that the colonies are what they are because of the love and the way they've benefited from being a part of the British Empire. So that's the Tory view. Where the Whig view is ridiculous, that everything we have here is because we have worked hard and built it ourselves with no help from England. If anything, against, the odds of oppression of England, we have built what we have ourselves. So leading up into, the 1760s and 1770s, we're hard at work arguing with each other over these things. Right? Are the guys in the Sons of Liberty bad guys, or are they good guys? Are they terrorists, or are they activists? And for a time, we were so busy arguing amongst ourselves that we couldn't see the way we were being set against each other by the crown and the parliament so that we would not see the corruption there and the exploitation of us in order to try to feed that corruption. But eventually we started figuring it out, right? And we started figuring that out right around the time of the Tea Act, when the Tea Act was passed in order to financially aid the corrupt East India Company, which was corrupt in many ways. And I know I've told you that one of these nights I'm going to do a night just on the East India Company. And I will do that. I have to study up a little bit more about that myself. But one night we will just talk about the East India Company because they are so much a part of the cause of the American Revolution. So we really should understand them a little bit better. So with the Tea Act, we began figuring out that maybe we were being used and maybe we were being set against each other by some terrible corrupt force on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And you may remember that early in 1776, Mr. Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense, in which he talked about the reasons we should unite and separate from England. And he talks about how although we have all of our differences here, right, we have tribal or ethnic differences, language differences, religious differences, every type of difference you can imagine, class differences. At least we are free to have our differences. Where if we allow the parliament to continue to rule over us, and if we allow them to now conquer us with their military, we will have no differences. We will all be made to submit to the crown. So Thomas Paine says, we have a unique opportunity here to set aside those differences, join together, and create a new nation, not under the divine right of kings, which he says is complete nonsense anyway. Thomas Paine asks, how can a king be expected to make decisions for an empire and colonies when the king is the most cloistered and protected person in England and knows nothing about life? And he then goes on to talk about the British symbol being the lion and saying, if the king meant for us to if God meant for us to have kings, why would he send asses as lions? So some very good stuff in Thomas Paine's Common Sense. But his message is we should put our differences aside. We have a unique opportunity to create a nation of many of us under the rule of law, where we can go back to having our differences, but we can be free to have them. And we can use those differences to figure out how best to govern ourselves. What an incredible message, right? And a few months after that will come the Declaration of Independence, which then tells us governments are instituted deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So we have this theme that's going on that, we should unite, get together, put our differences aside, create a government of ourselves, and then use those differences to determine what best that government should be and how best it should govern. And incredibly, it worked. We temporarily put those differences aside. Well, not totally, right? Livingston's fought for George Washington and the Delanceys fought for the king, and there were still some divisions like that, but most people put away their differences and joined up to fight for General Washington. And as you know, it was an incredible success. And thus the United States of America was born. And then it was time to create a new government, and the divisions began again. Of course, we must argue what type of government should we have. The general idea was that the governing document, the Articles of Confederation, passed during the war, was not sufficient to govern our new nation and should be amended. A convention was called at Philadelphia. Everyone sent delegates, and they were sent to fix that document, to rewrite it, to amend it, to make it a better document. And some of the young men who attended had a completely different idea, didn't they? Their idea was to write a completely new document. And those two young men you probably know were James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. Against the orders of their delegations, I should say, against the orders of their state governments and against their fellow delegates from their states. But after some hot debate, intense debate that you might remember on Saturday, Mr. Madison would not tell us about because he said that they were sworn to secrecy to their graves about the debates that went on between the gentlemen. So we couldn't get Mr. Madison, even I couldn't get Mr. Madison to tell us what they were debating and what the arguments were, because those were a secret. And I don't think in your time you still know very much about that. So the gentlemen kept that a secret. But they eventually came around and wrote one new document, the United States Constitution, and then they had to justify it. They had to justify its ratification. And the two states that were the most angry, of course, were Virginia and New York. And since we're in New York, we'll talk about New York tonight. So New York, of course, had two factions again. The faction in favor of the Constitution, who we might call Federalists, and the faction against the Constitution, who we might call Democratic Republicans or Anti-Federalists. Looking to see if I have any notes. Okay, we're good. So we have Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And who were the Federalists? Well, the de facto leader, and as someone said, the heart and soul of the Federalists in New York was young Mr. Hamilton. Somehow now, a general. And I've asked Mr. Q a number of times about this. Mr. Q, how is it that Mr. Hamilton mustered out of the army at the end of the War for Independence as a colonel? We've had no other war, but somehow now he is a general. Seems very strange to me. And Mr. Q simply waves me off and he says, Mrs. Q, you know how these things go. And that is all the explanation I've received. So we now have young General Hamilton at the head of our Federalists. And along with him are some very big names that you probably still remember in your time. Mr. John Jay, Mr. Robert R. Livingston, Mr. Philip Schuyler, and the whole Van Rensselaer clan, which of course you know my sister has married into. So Mrs. Van R., my sister, the Van Rensselaers. On the opposite side, led by a very popular, powerful gentleman, the anti-federalist, Governor George Clinton, our governor during the Revolutionary War, and elected after the evacuation of the British to continue serving as our governor. And someone is mentioning Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr at that time was a Federalist. I'll be getting to that. And then we'll talk about how that all came about a little bit later, but for now, Aaron Burr is a Federalist, and he is on the side of the Constitution. So we have George Clinton, we have Judge Robert Yates, Judge John Lansing, who happened to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of New York, Mr. Melancton Smith, probably the most savvy anti-federalist of that time. He served in our provincial Congress and also was a commander in the Dutchess County Rangers during the war. Melancton Smith was a merchant, and along with John Jay on the other side, right, Mr. Smith is an anti-federalist, Mr. Jay is a federalist, but together they will come and start the Manumission Society of New York. So we have a little compromise going on there, or as you might say, reaching across the aisle a little bit. And it's believed that most of the anti-federalist papers written were done by Mr. Smith, with some other gentlemen adding a few. But they're the most eloquent arguments in New York being made against the Constitution were General Clinton, I should say, oops, wrong Clinton, Governor Clinton and Mr. Melancton Smith. And answering those articles, you know already, are the Federalists, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, answering them back in the federal articles or the Federalist Papers, as you know them. So everyone is arguing back and forth over this. And New York called our ratification convention to ratify the Constitution. It went on for 3 weeks. And even Melancton Smith himself said that his own delegation was as useful as a flock of sheep dispersed upon a hill. and Judge Livingston called them like children blowing bubbles with a pipe. But I can say the good thing about this is, as Mr. Payne promised, we were able to now debate openly what our own government should be. And everyone was contributing to this debate. We were all reading the Constitution. By the way, they burned it in Albany. Just to give you an idea of what's going on up there, they burned it in Albany. So it wasn't popular everywhere. But they argued for 3 weeks at the convention, and eventually Rhode Island, I think, one of the New England states, I think it was Rhode Island, ratified and put us over the number of states we needed in order to ratify the Constitution. Our anti-federalists now lost their leverage, didn't they? They wanted all these changes made. They wanted all these amendments, and they wanted their ratification to be based on the promise of these changes or inclusion of them. But they waited so long, the Constitution went into effect, and they lost their leverage. So all they could do now, as Mr. Smith said, was to agree to ratification with the understanding that amendments would be forthcoming. And that is eventually how New York ratified the Constitution. See, if they had just, hurried it up a little bit and got that argument together, then, maybe we would have got some changes. By the way, one of the things New York wanted, which I think you will find very interesting, is a type of term limits. New York requested the presidency be limited to 2 consecutive terms, and they requested that a senator only be allowed to serve 6 years every 12 years. So if you served, you had to leave for a full term before you could return. I see Mrs. Healy is giving me the thumbs up. Not a bad idea. So you see, the anti-federalists in New York were not the type of crackpots that you in the future have been led to believe they were. They had some very good and valid ideas, that being, those 2 being one of them. So we get our Constitution ratified. The state was mostly divided geographically, as you could imagine, with the Federalist faction being located mainly here in and around New York City, and the Anti-Federalist faction being located further up into the Hudson Valley and throughout the rest of the rural state. So that's about how the 2 sides played out. And that is about how they would continue through 1804 and the duel between Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Burr. So the kind of will stay divided up the same way. And let me see. Oh, the vote was very close to ratify. It was only won by 3 votes. So New York only ratified by a margin of 3, which meant that even after ratification, everyone became brutally divided, stayed very divided over the Constitution and what those amendments would be. And one night I'll have Mr. Madison join us and he can talk about all of the amendments, because there were quite a lot of them that were suggested by New York, including, if you came on the tour or watched the live stream, or later the edited tour, that New York wanted an amendment that kind of let them leave the country if they wanted to. Just say, sorry, we're out. We don't like any of it. Goodbye. So nullification sort of thing. So, but obviously that wasn't going to happen. Let me see if I forgot anything. Okay, so we're ratified now. So now the Constitution is ratified, and we set about arguing over all of our local politics. How will we elect our representatives? How will we draw districts? How will we choose our senators? And that arguing became so intense and went on for so long that we didn't have senators for the first meeting of the federal Congress or congressmen. So we missed out on that. We did manage to get our electors elected and pledged for President Washington and Vice President Adams, but that was about as far as we got by Inauguration Day. So when Inauguration Day came along, we were still arguing over how to choose our senators and how to elect our members of the House of Representatives. But later in the year, I should say, if we're in 1789 and it is May 6th, we'll get that worked out in a little while, where we almost have that worked out. So now there's very much concern about the politics of New York. George Clinton, our governor at this time, the time Washington is inaugurated, is very popular among the people. He was our war-serving governor. He was a man of the people. He did not come from great wealth or aristocracy, very well respected, and had served our state very well. It was very popular and has been reelected to serve again. Unfortunately, General Hamilton has other ideas and has a bit of a grudge against Governor Clinton for opposing the Constitution and leading such a successful push against the Constitution, as I mentioned, it getting ratified only by 3 votes at the convention, that he now wants to remove Governor Clinton from being governor. And we have an election coming up later this year. So Mr. Hamilton has now formed another political faction working on the ouster of Governor Clinton. And the person he would like to succeed him, surprisingly to me, is Judge Yates, who, of course, was also an anti-federalist, which makes one wonder what is going on between Judge Yates and the Federalists that they would all support him. And I think I do have a list of I have a list of the committee that was formed to advocate for Judge Yates. And that was Mr. Hamilton, a Mr. Robert Troup, who was a colonel in the war, and he was Hamilton's roommate at King's College. William Dorr, another friend of Hamilton's, who is serving on his financial staff. And of course, Aaron Burr, who in a short time is going to be made Attorney General of New York. And this summer, he will become our Attorney General. So they are the committee to elect Judge Yates. And unfortunately, the committee to elect Judge Yates gets rather insulting toward Governor Clinton and Governor Clinton's supporters. And we have a new alignment of what's going on in New York. So we have Hamilton, who they said was the life and soul of the venomous opposition to Governor Clinton. And along with him is what we would call the New York aristocracy. So we have here in Westchester County, close to us, the Morris and Van Cortlandt families. And you might know there are still homes in your time that they lived in that are historic landmarks. In the Hudson, the Livingstons and Coldens, and in Albany, of course, the Schuylers and Van Rensselaers, versus everyone else. Now, there is a worry in New York that Hamilton's faction is going to establish a rule by aristocracy. And one of the ways they're going to do that is by using Hamilton's Bank of New York in order to control wealth and keep it concentrated in that aristocracy to be sure that they get loans and they get what they need in order to grow their wealth, while the working people, the artisans and everyone else, farmers, are kept away from that. You call it upward mobility or prosperity. So we have that growing concern in New York as well, that the anti-federalists will be more responsive to the needs of the artisans and the farmers and the dock workers. And the federalists are a faction of aristocracy. So this is kind of where we are after Washington's inauguration in the way the two sides are being viewed by the people. And so we have the election coming up, and it is quite nasty in the newspapers. And I put together a few quotes from last week's newspaper for you, just so that you can see how it's going. And I have to read this one because it's really long, but I assure you, you will enjoy hearing it. And this is from last week's New York Weekly Journal. And it's signed a friend in the Southern District. So this is a friend of the anti-federalists or Clintonites in the Southern District. So here in New York City. And this gentleman says, "I am sorry to deprive a vain man of the pleasures of vanity and strike from under him the brittle staff which supports him. Be assured, man of wind, that Clinton and his friends view your efforts with ineffable contempt, and for the good of mankind, wish you may do anything but follow your profession." I'm sure you know who he's talking about. The vain man, the man of wind, hoping that he will not continue to be a lawyer. And another quote in the same paper refers to the same gentleman as a man not from humble, but a low sphere, is ready to plant the bloody flag of revenge on the ruin of this city's tranquility. Are those wonderful? Of course, they're both referring to General Hamilton. And my only complaint is the second quote. I would like to know what era this gentleman is referring to, that we ever had tranquility in the city. You can see there's a little bit of, shall we say, white lying going on both sides. The idea that we ever had tranquility in the city. My goodness, ridiculous. So this is what is occurring weekly in the newspapers now as we head into the gubernatorial election. And since I am a time traveler, I can tell you that Governor Clinton will win that election, and he will be reelected this year in 1789. And Mr. Burr will go on to serve as Attorney General. Governor Clinton will appoint him to Attorney General, and Mr. Hamilton will keep agitating, won't he? He'll keep agitating against the Anti-Federalists, and it wouldn't surprise me if one day that agitation brought him to his grave. Wouldn't surprise me at all, the direction that Mr. Hamilton is going and the number of powerful enemies he is acquiring along the way. And I'm still wondering how he became a general. So if anyone out there knows how Mr. Hamilton, who spent very little time in the field of battle in the Revolutionary War and mustered out a colonel, is now a general, I would really like to know how that happened. As Mr. Marinus Willett is still only a colonel, yet a mayor. So it's very puzzling to me how that all occurred. So if you have any questions or comments, please, feel free to ask me or to put them in the comments. I'm happy to see everyone back again, and I don't think I'll be missing any Fridays for quite a long time. And if you don't know, Mr. Q and I have reserved a new puppy, so we will be bringing home a new Q dog, who we are naming for the great Roman leader Quintus Fabius Maximus. So our dog will be dog QQ, I guess, Quintus Q. And of course, when we get him, I'll hold him up and I'll show him to you so you can all meet him. Mr. Q remarked today that certainly he will tear down the green screen behind me at least once, if not more times when he's here. So we could have some good fun on Friday nights. So I hope everyone is well. And I'll be looking for you next Friday. Maybe next Friday, if I have enough time, maybe we will talk about the East India Company, a very important topic, a little less humorous than tonight, but a topic I think all Americans should understand so that everyone understands the coming of the war for independence a little bit better. So thank you again for joining me. I hope you liked my new little bed gown. Came out really nice. This is just some cheap fabric I found. So it came out really nice. And let's see. And I thank you all for supporting me and my work. And I'll see you all next week. And Mrs. Healy, good luck with your house guest. I know you have a lengthy house guest. I hope that's going well. Hi. And I will see you all next week. And I'll see you on social media in the meantime. Goodbye. Good night.